Have you ever noticed that most ADHD advice seems to focus on productivity? How to get more done, how to become more organized, how to manage your time better, how to stop procrastinating, how to finally become consistent. And yet, for many women with ADHD, especially after 40, productivity isn't actually the biggest problem. Energy is. Because most ADHD women already know what they should be doing. They know they should exercise more. They know they should go to bed earlier. They know they should answer the email, make the appointment, finish the project, clean the kitchen, organize the paperwork, and follow through on the plans they made last week. The problem isn't a lack of knowledge. The problem is that many days they simply don't have the energy, and that creates a painful cycle. They blame themselves for being inconsistent. They assume they are lazy. They tell themselves they need more discipline. They compare themselves to people who seem capable of functioning at the same level every single day. But what if the entire conversation is happening in the wrong place? What if ADHD is not primarily a productivity problem? What if it is fundamentally an energy management problem? Because when you start looking through that lens, many things suddenly begin to make sense. One of the biggest misconceptions about ADHD is that people imagine it as an attention problem. They assume ADHD means not being able to focus. But researchers increasingly understand ADHD as a condition involving regulation. Regulation of attention, regulation of motivation, regulation of emotions, and perhaps most importantly, regulation of energy. Anyone who lives with ADHD knows this intuitively. Some days, your brain feels clear, capable, creative, and focused. You can solve complex problems, organize your life, and accomplish more in a few hours than some people accomplish all week. Then another day arrives, and suddenly everything feels heavy. The simplest tasks seem impossible. The smallest decision feels exhausting. You stare at your to-do list and wonder where all your capacity went. Most people interpret this inconsistency as a character flaw. It isn't. It's often an energy problem. Traditional productivity advice assumes that people wake up each morning with roughly the same amount of available fuel. The entire productivity industry is built around that assumption. Create better systems, develop better habits, use better tools, become more efficient. But ADHD brains don't operate on a stable energy supply. They operate on a fluctuating one. Sleep affects energy. Hormones affect energy. Sensory input affects energy. Emotional stress affects energy. Recovery affects energy. Social interaction affects energy. Environmental stimulation affects energy. What looks like inconsistency from the outside often looks very different from the inside. From the inside, it feels like trying to drive a car when the fuel gauge keeps changing. And if you've spent decades wondering why life feels harder than it seems to be for everyone else, understanding this may be one of the most important shifts you ever make. The simplest way to understand ADHD energy is through a formula that almost nobody talks about. Energy equals capacity minus load. That's it, not motivation, not discipline, not willpower. Capacity minus load. Capacity represents everything that supports your nervous system's ability to function. Sleep increases capacity. Physical movement increases capacity. Recovery increases capacity. Emotional safety increases capacity. Good nutrition increases capacity. Calm environments increase capacity. Healthy boundaries increase capacity. Load is everything your nervous system has to process. Noise creates load. Conflict creates load. Crowded environments create load. Constant notifications create load. Uncertainty creates load. Hormonal fluctuations create load. Emotional labor creates load. Decision-making creates load. Social masking creates load. Most people spend their lives trying to increase capacity while completely ignoring load. This is especially common among intelligent ADHD women. They read the books, they buy the supplements, They improve their nutrition, they start exercising, they try meditation, they optimize their routines. And those things absolutely matter, but sometimes the fastest way to increase energy isn't adding more capacity, it's reducing load. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks. You could spend years trying to become stronger so you can carry the backpack more efficiently, or you could simply start removing rocks. Many ADHD women have spent decades adding rocks. More commitments, more responsibilities, more expectations, more information, more obligations, more people needing something from them, more social demands, more sensory stimulation, more pressure to appear organized, successful, calm, and capable. Eventually, the nervous system reaches a point where the load exceeds the available capacity. And when that happens, exhaustion becomes inevitable, not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, because the math stopped working. This becomes particularly important after 40. Many women describe a moment when the strategies that worked for years suddenly stop working. They used to push through exhaustion. They used to recover quickly. They used to tolerate high levels of stress. They used to handle work, family, responsibilities, relationships, and endless obligations without completely falling apart. Then something changes. Often that change arrives during perimenopause. Hormones begin shifting, sleep becomes less predictable, recovery becomes slower, stress feels heavier, sensory sensitivity often increases, emotional regulation requires more effort. Many women interpret this as personal failure. In reality, it may simply be that the nervous system is no longer willing to compensate for an unsustainable lifestyle. For years, adrenaline may have been filling the gap. Now the gap becomes visible. This is one reason so many high-functioning ADHD women suddenly find themselves exhausted in midlife. The systems they used to rely on stop producing the same results. Pushing harder no longer works. Working longer no longer works. Ignoring their body's signals no longer works. And because society teaches us that success comes from effort, many women respond by applying even more effort. Unfortunately, that often accelerates the problem. Because energy is not created through force. Energy is protected through regulation. One of the biggest hidden energy drains for ADHD women is overstimulation. Many people underestimate how much energy the brain spends processing the environment. Noise, visual clutter, crowded stores, bright lighting, constant conversations, traffic, notifications, television in the background, dozens of open browser tabs, unfinished projects scattered throughout the house. Every one of these things requires processing power. The ADHD brain tends to notice more than other brains. More sounds, more movement, more details, more information, more possibilities. That heightened awareness can be a gift, but it also comes with a cost. The nervous system is working harder all day long. This is one reason why so many ADHD women describe feeling unexpectedly calm in nature. Nature reduces cognitive load. The environment becomes simpler. The nervous system has fewer competing signals to process. The brain can finally stop scanning for the next demand. Another hidden drain is decision fatigue. Modern life requires an astonishing number of decisions. What should I eat? What should I wear? Which task should I start with? Which email matters most? Should I answer now or later? Should I say yes or no? Should I buy this? Should I schedule that? Every decision consumes energy. And because ADHD brains often struggle with prioritization, the energy cost of decision-making can be significantly higher. By the end of the day, many women are not physically exhausted. They are cognitively exhausted. Their brains have simply processed too much information. But perhaps the most overlooked energy drain of all is masking. Many women with ADHD spend years, or even decades, trying to appear more neurotypical than they actually are. They monitor themselves constantly. They try not to interrupt. They try not to forget things. They try not to appear distracted. They try not to appear overwhelmed. They work incredibly hard to maintain an image of competence. Most people never see the effort, but the nervous system feels every second of it. Masking is like running dozens of invisible programs in the background of a computer. Even when you're not consciously aware of them, they consume resources. This is why some women feel completely drained after social situations that seemed perfectly pleasant. Nothing bad happened. Nobody upset them. The interaction went well. Yet they come home exhausted. Not because they were social, because they were managing themselves the entire time. Once you begin viewing ADHD through the lens of energy rather than productivity, your priorities start changing. The question is no longer, how can I get more done? The question becomes, how can I create more available energy? Those are very different questions. Sometimes the answer is better sleep. Sometimes it's better boundaries. Sometimes it's fewer commitments. Sometimes it's a quieter environment. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's leaving stimulation behind before your nervous system reaches its limit. The goal is not becoming more productive. The goal is becoming more sustainable. Ironically, productivity often improves as a result because when energy increases, executive function improves, emotional regulation improves, focus improves, motivation improves, decision-making improves. The things you've been trying to force suddenly require less force. And perhaps that is the ADHD energy formula nobody explains. Your life is not determined by how motivated you are. Your life is not determined by how disciplined you are. Your life is largely determined by the relationship between your capacity and your load. When load exceeds capacity, exhaustion appears. When capacity exceeds load, life becomes manageable. And every day you have opportunities to influence both sides of that equation. You can increase capacity through recovery, sleep, movement, nourishment, and nervous system regulation. You can reduce load through boundaries, simplicity, calmer environments, fewer commitments, and less stimulation. Neither approach is perfect, but together they create something powerful. They create enough energy to actually live your life. Because at the end of the day, most ADHD women don't need another productivity system. They need a life that costs less energy to maintain. A life with fewer rocks in the backpack. A life where the nervous system is supported rather than constantly overwhelmed. And perhaps most importantly, a life where they stop measuring themselves against people with entirely different nervous systems. Your energy is not a moral issue. It is not proof of laziness. It is not proof that you are failing. It is information. And the more you learn to listen to that information, the more your life begins to change. If this resonates with you, let me know in the comments. What drains your energy the fastest? And if you're interested in ADHD, nervous system health, longevity, and calm living after 40, make sure you subscribe to Complex Brain Living. We publish a new video every Sunday. Until next time, protect your energy, be kind to your nervous system, and remember that living well is often less about doing more and more about carrying less.